After a very, very long time, many disappointments and setbacks, we finally have a set of Canon EOS R5 Mark II specifications. But is this going to make the Canon EOS R5 Mark II a game changer that many had hoped for? Will it be enough for you to upgrade from the Mark I? Or will you be completely disappointed? But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. Early this morning, Canon Rumors said, we've been told that Canon has sent out some NDAs to a certain segment. We pieced together a specifications list of the EOS R5 Mark II from multiple known sources. So we're not putting together a CR3 on this just yet. All right, let's get right to the specifications, and we're going to start off with the sensor first. The Canon EOS R5 Mark II is going to get a 45 megapixel sensor. Now, that's a letdown from what many were hoping it being, well, 60, 61, 62, or even 85 megapixels. Nope, it's going to be 45 megapixels. So will it have a global shutter? Will it be a stacked sensor? Well, according to Canon Rumors, the Canon EOS R5 Mark II is going to have a 45 megapixel full frame BSI sensor, not a stacked sensor, a backside illuminated sensor. Now, this is going to send many people into a frustrated rage of disappointment. But hold on a minute here. I've said this many times in the past. What a backside illuminated sensor does is gives us, most of the benefits of a stacked sensor. We have that ability to have, improved low light performance, more dynamic range, better color rendition in those low light conditions. That's what a backside illuminated sensor does. Instead of having the circuitry in front of the photodiode, it moves it to the back of the chip, and that's what allows more light to be captured by the photodiode, giving us that improved dynamic range and low light performance. So a stack sensor actually adds DRAM and an image signal processor to the back of the chip, and that's an upgrade over the BSI. So a stack sensor works with a BSI, adds RAM and an image signal processor. So what that means is it's able to shoot a whole lot faster and to be able to reduce any sort of remnants of a rolling shutter. Not as good as a global shutter, but to the point where you're not going to notice a difference. So if you're doing fast action photography, well, a stack sensor really comes in. And when I get to some of the other specifications here, it's going to seem a little bit strange that the Canon EOS R5 doesn't have a stack sensor. And this would certainly give the Nikon Z8 talking points over the Canon EOS R5. I can see Vahography and others going, well, look at this. We finally beat Canon with the Nikon Z8 coming out a few years earlier. That it has a stacked sensor and the Canon EOS R5 only has a backside illuminated sensor. That's interesting, very interesting. But again, I think from my point of view, a backside illuminated sensor isn't bad technology. Again, we get that better dynamic range, low light performance, and better color rendition in low light performance. So from that point of view, it's definitely a win for the R5 Mark II. Now let's talk about the image sensor, or the image processor, I should say. The image processor, it's getting an all-new image processor. We don't know if it's going to be called the Digic XS, the Digic 11, and we don't know what capabilities it's going to have. So this new sensor, this new image processor, is going to allow Canon to shoot up to 60 frames per second continuous shooting. That's right, 60 frames per second on a 45 megapixel sensor. That's just huge, the amount of data. Now, I don't know from this whether that's going to be JPEG only, whether that's going to be some sort of compressed RAW, but what it's definitely going to do is put the CF Express Type B cards right to the max. The Nikon Z8, the Nikon Z9 can shoot 20 frames per second lossless RAW at 45.7 megapixels and generate 1.2 gigabytes per second of data. Now, for this to be able to do RAW, it would definitely have to shoot some sort of compressed lossless RAW. It could definitely do it in JPEG, but that requires an awful lot of data. So the sensor and the image processor working together are going to have to process a whole lot of information. And for that to happen, I really would expect to have some sort of stacked sensor. But again, these aren't validated specs at this point. They're coming from multiple sources. So while I certainly get the 45 megapixel sensor, at this point, I wouldn't be too convinced that it's going to be backside illuminated. Let's wait for confirmation there. But 60 frames per second, that's definitely more than I was expecting. I was expecting a bump up to at least 30 or 40 frames per second, and that is impressive. Now, the Canon EOS R6 Mark II can do 40 frames per second RAW. You also shouldn't be surprised that the autofocus system is going to be improved. It's going to have many new AI autofocus capabilities. And we've talked about this in the past. We've seen so many patent applications that talk about improvements to the autofocus system. One is if we have a subject or an object that is moving around in the frame and passes behind something, the autofocus system isn't going to pulse. It's not going to act, oh my God, where is it? What do I do? And go absolutely crazy. And even if the subject temporarily moves out of the frame and then comes back in, things are going to appear much more cinematic, much more natural. The autofocus system is going to it's going to think like us, for example. And I think that's a really big boon, but there's no mention in these specifications as to what the AI enhancements are. But again, those patent applications really do help us at least give us an idea of what Canon's been working on. And that helps us give an idea of what's going to go into the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. And we've seen, I think, 5 different patents on this subject and object moving in and out of the frame, or moving behind an object, or the object moving in front of the subject. Enough not to believe that there's going to be improved subject and object tracking in this update. Now, in terms of video, it's definitely going to be able to do 8K RAW. Yeah, whoopee. Okay, doesn't say frame rates. Now, the Canon EOS R5, the Mark I, can do 8K RAW up to 30 frames per second. There's no mention whether that can do 8K up to 60 frames per second, just that it can do 8K RAW. And 4K, well, it can do it up to 120 frames per second. So what? The Mark I can do 4K up to 120 frames per second. Now, where this would really be a big deal is if that new image processor has the guts to be able to deliver full sensor 8K oversample 4K, not just up to 30 frames per second, but to 50, 60, or even 100 and 120 frames per second. Now, there's no mention whether it can do 150, 180, or even 240 frames per second like some previous rumors had stated. Just 4K, 120 frames per second. And there's no mention of how well it's going to be able to shoot in 180 frames per second or 1080p. And for video shooters, you're going to be happy to hear this. It's going to have Canon Log 1 and Canon Log 3, as well as Canon Log 2. Now, there's no mention of Canon Log 4. Canon hasn't announced this yet. Some had speculated, and there had been some rumors that we would get Canon Log 4. But we get Canon Log 1, 2, and 3. Finally, Canon Log 2. I know many of you have been hoping for this. So we get Canon Log 2 and the Canon EOS R5 Mark II. Now, one other thing, it is going to get a brand new articulating screen. Articulating screen, I'll try to say that properly. We don't know if it's going to be anything like this articulating LCD found in the Sony a7R5, a 4-axis LCD that flips out, rotates, and does, well, everything that everybody wants. It's perfect for vloggers, it's perfect for video shooters, and it's perfect for those that are shooting with super telephoto lenses where they can bring it out and look right down the barrel of the lens, making it easier to, well, focus and do everything you need to do without losing track of your subject. And I really love that, what Sony's done in the a7R5. I think that's got to be the best LCD out there. So this new LCD, I hope it's not just resolution. I hope it's not just a slightly different design. I hope it is a 4-axis LCD. So again, Canon Rumor says that they're collecting these from various sources. They're not willing to commit to it as being a CR3. So what do I see as potential red flags here? Well, the image sensor, to me, a backside illuminated sensor, sure, certainly makes sense. 100% I would expect that. But in the fact that I would expect Canon to also put a stacked sensor in there which builds upon the backside illuminated and matches the competition, the Nikon Z8. Now, could Canon do other things in the design of that new sensor, because they design their own sensors, to give it the same level of performance as the Nikon Z8? Well, certainly they could. And this is where actually stated specifications can differ from actual results. Because when it comes to us as photographers or videographers, it's all about that value chain, about delivering on our workflow to give us an end result that is improved. So if we get better low light performance, better dynamic range, better color rendition in low light situations, as well as reduced rolling shutter and the ability to shoot at 60 frames per second lossless RAW, or compressed lossless RAW, because unless they do some sort of RAID 0 with their CF Express Type B cards and give us 2 of them, That's going to be hard to do. It's going to have to be either JPEG at that speed, or they're going to have to offer some sort of compressed RAW, lossless or lossy. Yeah, and that's what we don't know at this point. There's a lot of things we don't know. The video modes don't seem that impressive because they're not giving us anything that we didn't have before. 8K RAW, up to 60 frames per second. The Nikon Z8 can do 8K RAW up to 60 frames per second. What about Apple ProRes? What about frame rates higher than 120 frames per second? What about 4K 120? Is it 8K oversampled? 4K 60? Is it 8K oversampled? That oversample makes a huge difference. It's what gives the Canon EOS R5 Mark I much better sharpness than the Sony a7S III. But once we move to 60 frames per second, there's a rather significant fall off in detail. I think the Canon EOS R5 Mark II is definitely going to be worth upgrading for many of us. But with these specifications here, it's nothing to get excited about. It's something where I look at these specifications, and when I first saw them, I thought, okay, this looks nice. This looks what I could see in a Mark II, but it didn't get me excited. 45 megapixels, I've got that now. Backside illuminated. Well, that had me a little bit excited because improved low light performance, right? Dynamic range, all that jazz. 60 frames per second, well, that's impressive, but I can't see myself in most situations wanting to shoot anywhere near that. Now, 30 frames per second when shooting certain types of wildlife might certainly come in. But what about all the other details around shooting photography? ISO range. What about the level of detail when shooting at 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second? What about 12-bit RAW, 14-bit RAW, 16-bit RAW? All these things that we don't know about. Now, when it comes to the video side, we all know the capabilities of Canon Log 1, 2, and 3. We know the envelope and what it can do, but from the photo side, once again, for some reason, the leaked specifications leave us wanting. And maybe that's by design. Let's tease up all the video shooters because that gets YouTube talking because they're all YouTube people. But on the photography side, let's leave them guessing. Yeah, these leaked specifications are the first that, as I said a few days ago, we should start getting something soon. But to get overly excited about them, I can't say I'm overly excited about this camera based on the level of detail that we're getting in these specifications. Now, this could prove to be a big game changer for how we shoot, but we'll just have to wait and see. What do you think? Are you excited by this, or are you sticking with your Mark I? And with the Canon EOS R5 Mark I currently on sale for $29.99 at B&H and Adorama, with Adorama throwing in a 128 gigabyte CF Express Type B card and card reader, is that beginning to look a little bit more, well, worthwhile? And if you're interested in purchasing that and any other cameras here on The Ordinary Filmmaker, or not on The Ordinary Filmmaker, but if you're looking at purchasing it from Adorama, B&H, and Amazon.com, then please consider using my affiliate links down below, these guys right here, because I actually do get anywhere from 2 to 12% back from any purchases. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and that goes right back into supporting this channel. And thank you to everybody that has used my affiliate links in the past. It's what's funding the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and any other purchase that I make here in 2024. But that's it for now. I'm really curious to see what does transpire. We're about 2 months away from the actual announcement of the Canon EOS R5 Mark II and the EOS R1, at least according to Canon rumors. So if you want to stay up to date on all the latest and greatest, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button and choose all notifications. And don't forget to follow me on X. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.